My honourable friend is right. The sacrifice that those who serve in uniform make to keep us all safe is exceptional. The least their families deserve is a decent home. It's, after all, the heart of all our lives. The steps we've taken with the buyback of the Annington homes is a decisive break from the past, and we will now put in place the necessary plans to upgrade Forces family homes for the future.
Clive Jones.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Ministry of Defence owns over 300 houses in the former Arborfield garrison in my constituency. Only a handful are occupied by service families. The remainder are let privately but are increasingly left vacant, which, with the estate also not being maintained, is affecting the lives of constituents. I'm told that no decisions can be taken on the future until a housing strategy is completed. Can an early decision be taken by the Ministry of Defence on the housing in Arborfield to stop the neglect and return much needed affordable housing to the market?
Well, if the honourable gentleman would like to write to me with the specifics, I will certainly look into that. But he sets out for the House some of the character of the nature of neglect and decline that we've seen in our forces housing for so long, and the bind that governments have been in the past without the power or control to do the upgrades and make the plans for wholesale renewal for the future. That is what our housing review will start to fix. We can't fix these deep-seated long-run problems overnight, but we are determined to do better than we've done in the past.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can the Secretary of State reassure Forces families in North Durham that the Labour government is ending the failed papering over the cracks approach that the previous Conservative government had, and is instead taking action to deliver new high-quality family homes for our service personnel over the years to come?
I can indeed, Mr Speaker. He and I stood on a manifesto in which we were elected as a government to end the scandal of Forces family homes. The buyback that we've put in place now is the start to deliver on that promise for Army and other Forces families, and to deliver, as we are on a number of fronts, for defence.
Thank you
very much, Mr Speaker. The litany of complaints I receive from service families in Gosport in accommodation include damp, black mould, unsafe electrical wiring and wastewater flowing into homes. One constituent wrote to me, "The overall condition of our flat is unfit for purpose, unhygienic and, quite frankly, a threat to our safety." Now, this has been going on for decades and under successive governments, and our service people, quite simply, deserve better. Their families deserve better. So what I want to know on behalf of my Gosport constituents from the Secretary of State is, when will we begin to see tangible differences? Pinnacle and Vivo are not fit for purpose. When will we see them actually being replaced with an organisation that can do these repairs and do them properly? And I'd love to invite the Secretary of State to Gosport to come and see some of this appalling service family accommodation for himself.
The Honourable Lady is right. It is shameful. Her government had 14 years to fix the problem. We are now doing that job. We have a policy in place which means that no one should be let a home with apparent damp and mould problems, that there is a special dedicated report line for that, and if the problems are severe, then they should be offered alternative accommodation. But the Housing Defence Review that we now have underway, that will report in the summer, will set out the plans for that long-term overhaul of these very deep-seated and overdue neglect of these problems.
Ashley Fox.
Question number 2, Mr Speaker.
Have you got it? Secretary.
Mr Speaker, as a new government, we've stepped up and speeded up the UK's military aid to Ukraine. This year, the UK will provide £4.5 billion in military support, the highest ever sum. We're fully behind President Trump's pledge to bring a lasting peace to Ukraine. We want to see success in the talks today, but we won't jeopardise the peace by forgetting about the war.
Sir Ashley.
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for his answer. Over the weekend, President Trump's special envoy dismissed the Prime Minister's plan for an international force to support the ceasefire in Ukraine, calling a posture and a pose. Whatever the wisdom of those remarks, does the Defence Secretary see a future where UK forces could deploy on peacekeeping operations in Ukraine without a US security guarantee?
Mr. Speaker, as the Chief of the Defence Staff said over the weekend, no one should be in doubt that the work that the UK with France is leading to pull together a coalition of nations willing to step in and help ensure the lasting peace in any negotiated settlement in Ukraine is critical and substantial. The UK is determined and will lead that effort.
Tom Rockland.
This year, the UK is providing Ukraine more financial aid through military support than at any time since Putin's illegal invasion. Does the Minister agree with me that it is crucial to wider European security and our own security here in the UK that we continue to support Ukraine and ramp up the pressure on Putin?
I do indeed, Mr. Speaker. Putting the Ukrainians in the strongest possible position as they choose to go into discussions is part of the responsibility and commitment of this government. We plan the support we provide very closely with Ukraine. Our 2025 plan to support Ukraine has been developed with them and reflects what they need most: drones, air defences, ammunition, which is why this month the Prime Minister announced a £1.6 billion deal to supply more than 5,000 LMMs, air defence missiles built in the UK. So both backing the Ukrainians in their fight and boosting British jobs and business.
Sir Julian Lewis.
In this age when the plot of the Manchurian Candidate appears more like a documentary on US politics than a work of fiction, has the government received any indication that its efforts militarily to support Ukraine would be actively opposed or blocked by the Trump administration?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made clear that the security arrangements or guarantees in Ukraine in the context of a negotiated peace will need US support. I've made the same point strongly in my discussions with Secretary Hegseth, and my job now as Defence Secretary is to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position by continuing levels of UK military aid, encouraging other nations to do more, and to develop alongside the French the plans for a multinational support to keep the long-term security of any peace in Ukraine.
Paul Wall.
Rochdale's Ukrainian community is fervently proud of what the Prime Minister has done in recent weeks, not just on the diplomatic front, but also record amounts of support for Ukraine militarily. But does the Secretary of State agree with me it's really important to call out the Russian lies and propaganda that have been propagated of late, including the lie that somehow Ukraine is not a real country, that it's a fake country, and also somehow the lie that Britain's security does not also depend on Ukraine's security?
My honourable friend is right. The first line of defence of the UK and of Europe is in Ukraine. They share our values. They are fighting with huge courage, military and civilians alike. It's our job to stand with them during the fight in order to safeguard their future and their ability to make their own decisions as a country. And if and when they go into the negotiations, we will stand with them then, and we will stand with them after a negotiated peace that we all hope President Trump is capable of securing.
So, Secretary of State James Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate the opposition with the remarks, Secretary of State, on Paddy Hemingway, the last of the few to whom we owe so much? On the potential peacekeeping force for Ukraine, we've heard from the Secretary of State that this is jointly British and French. In fact, he stressed in every one of his answers the amount of work we are doing with France. So is it therefore not extraordinary that at the very same time France should be working to undermine our defence industry by having us excluded from a £150 billion European defence fund, which will include other non-EU states?
Well, the honourable gentleman's a sort of half empty rather than half full type of guy, isn't he? Look, the European Union, when they produced their defence and security white paper last week, set in place specific arrangements for any third nation, like the UK, that strikes a defence and security partnership with the European Union, exactly what we went to the country with as a promise to undertake as a UK government. Any country with a partnership in place then has potentially access to those sort of programmes, that sort of funding, and that's what we will try and negotiate for this country and our industry.
James Cartledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure the Secretary I am full bifters behind our armed forces and the UK defence industry. Isn't this the point? We provide unconditionally to European NATO countries our nuclear deterrent 24/7. Our army is in Estonia defending Europe's eastern flank, and we have done more than any other European nation to support Ukraine. So can I ask the Secretary of State if he and the Prime Minister will stand up to President Macron and stress to him this is the worst possible time to prioritise fishing rights over Europe's collective security?
I just say to the honourable gentleman, look, drop that Brexit rhetoric. We are leading efforts with the French government and the French military to meet the challenge of the US and the requirements of the Ukraine to have a coalition of countries willing to stand with Ukraine in the context of a negotiated peace to help them secure enduring stability and deterrence to prevent Russia reinvading that sovereign country.
Colin Miller.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer question 3 and 19 together. I've always said you train people to join the military, train them to be in the military. We don't necessarily train them to be a civilian when they leave. And that's why this government has taken swift action to support veterans upon leaving. Last month I launched Ascend, which will help veterans thrive into post-service careers. Our hugely successful career transition partnership has now seen 88% of all veterans leaving straight into employment since October. We've extended national insurance contributions relief from April 2026 for employers who recruit veterans, and on top of that, this government has awarded £3.7 million in veterans' housing grants. I'm a firm believer that for the last 14 years, we haven't taken enough responsibility for supporting our veterans, and plans that we will unveil in the future will actually take a step in the right direction to improving that.
Lord Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Minister for his response. I recently visited the Hayford and Bicester Veterans Group in my constituency, which was set up by Ian Ridley to support fellow veterans across the region. This fantastic initiative brings together a range of services from charities, the NHS and local authorities to support veterans. Yet in speaking to Ian, I was amazed to discover that there is no funding from the MOD and that veterans in our region are not signposted towards its services when they leave the armed forces. So may I invite the Minister to come with me and visit this fantastic work so we can also discuss how we can make it more routine that the kinds of services it offers are made available to our fantastic veterans.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for making those points, and I'd like to thank all of the individuals that are probably primarily volunteers supporting veterans within his constituency. I just 2 days ago visited another tri-service veterans hub that is delivering probably exactly the same types of services, and what we often find is a lot of support out there, but it's actually navigating veterans to the right place to get it, and we're working on plans to help them navigate that process to get the help they need.
Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Harrogate is a proud armed forces town with the Army Foundation College located in it. Nearby, we've also got Menwith Hill and Catterick. North Yorkshire as a whole plays an important part for our armed forces. One of the things that I've heard from speaking to veterans in my constituency is that they've often moved back there after postings throughout their career. When they return to North Yorkshire, they're having issues accessing housing through the local authority. So what conversations is the Minister having with local government colleagues to ensure that local authorities better understand how to listen to the needs and adaptations that veterans need when accessing local authority housing?
I'd like to again thank the Honourable Member for the question. As he well knows, access to housing, social and affordable housing across the country is a severe issue. We work with a lot of local councils explaining to them the covenant as a whole and trying to get veterans fast-tracked. Op Fortitude is a prime example of that. We've had 3,000 referrals, 825 veterans put into housing in a relatively short period of time, and I'd like to connect you up with them to ensure any veterans that need that support, we can signpost them in the right direction.
Catherine Atkinson.
Speaker, I visited Richard, a veteran in his home provided by Daventio Housing. which is a trust in Derby that offers homes for those without, including those who served in our armed forces. And volunteers from Devonshire recently renovated a house in the city specifically for veterans. Does the Minister agree with me that support like this is vital? And can he tell us what the government is doing to help provide housing, care and support for our veterans in need?
I'd like to thank for the points made and also congratulate the individuals within that specific charity and trust for supporting the veterans within our constituency. One thing I've realised as visiting so many different parts of the UK now is the phenomenal volunteer support that veterans often have to rely on. And what we would like to do as we move forward is put in place a structure that helps focus that support, but also direct veterans to the support they need in a faster and more effective way. And those are the plans that we'll look to unveil in due course.
Speaker, will the Minister meet with me and other members of the APPG on the armed forces to discuss rolling out the best practice of some fire authorities to give those who've served our country an automatic interview in relevant roles in the public sector? I think this is a brilliant idea that would really benefit my constituents in Darlington, and I think those who've gone above and beyond to serve our country should be served by all of us on their return.
I think this is a great initiative. Service beyond service is something we should be promoting, and I'd like to take that as best practice, have a look at it and see if we can roll it out across the nation. So when individuals leave the military, they can get at least a first interview into the fire service, the police, the NHS or any other public services available. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
Thank you, sir. Veterans who served in Northern Ireland will no doubt welcome the Veterans Minister's decision, as first suggested by the Shadow Defence Secretary, that the MOD should judicially review the recent coroner's verdict regarding the shooting of several IRA terrorists at Clonno. Well done. But why not go further to protect veterans and drop the plans to revoke large parts of the Northern Ireland Legacy Act, which would only serve to facilitate yet more inquests of this type?
Very good. Very good.
So I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for what is a really important point, and I share the concerns and visited Northern Ireland just 2 weeks ago of many veterans who've served in Northern Ireland, and in particular the misinterpretation of the challenging context of which a lot of these inquests and inquiries are taking place. And may I remember both sides of the House that not so long ago, in the 70s, 80s and 90s, there were major explosions in every major city in the UK. There were assassinations taking place across the UK. That killings were a regular event in Northern Ireland. And we sent our service personnel there to protect peace, save lives and indeed prevent a civil war.
Sides of the House. Revoking the Legacy Act would encourage a system of two-tier justice, one for our army veterans and another for alleged IRA terrorists, including those given so-called letters of comfort by the Blair regime. Now, with many of those veterans having served in proud regiments which traditionally recruited from Red Wall northern constituencies, why should a Labour government assist Gerry Adams to sue the British taxpayer? How is that supporting those who serve their country valiantly on Operation Banner?
Let's just be absolutely clear. You're looking at an individual who served his country on Operational Banner. So I understand the issues for all of our veterans, and I've been working very, very hard with the Northern Ireland Office to make sure that veterans' welfare and legal services are provided to ensure that anyone involved in any of the investigations get the support they require, and we can minimise the impact on what are quite a unique group of elderly veterans.
Nick Timothy.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I'll answer questions 4 and 7 together. We are committed to maintaining and enhancing the security and resilience of critical undersea infrastructure, just as the Defence Secretary called out the activities of the Russian spy ship Yantar hovering over our undersea cables. Let those who threaten the UK or allies be in no doubt that we will defend our undersea infrastructure. This is just one area that the Strategic Defence Review is looking at in order to enhance our homeland security.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for the answer. In January, I asked the Defence Secretary which single minister is responsible for the security of offshore infrastructure. We know Russia and China target interconnectors and undersea cables. We know Russia places listening devices on our wind turbines to monitor submarines. And we know that China controls the tech in the turbines that the Energy Secretary wants to buy. The Defence Secretary couldn't answer me in January, and neither did the Prime Minister when I asked him about this earlier this month. So when are we going to find out who is actually in charge?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind the Prime Minister is responsible for the security of this nation, and he delegates different areas to different departments. That is a completely normal way of dealing with our national security. But within defence, let's be absolutely clear, within defence, we take it seriously and we work with our cross-departmental colleagues to make sure that not only are we securing our infrastructure from a defence perspective, we're using our trade routes to make sure that we are protecting and buying the right technology, and we're using our planning system to make sure that where there is development, it doesn't impinge on our national security.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister will be well aware that 99% of internet traffic is carried on undersea cables, and clearly the Russians and other enemies would seek to disrupt that. Will the Minister look at utilising autonomous minesweepers that can therefore be deployed to protect our undersea cables? And in particular, will he commit to be looking at introducing that in the Black Sea if there is actually a truce between Russia and Ukraine, so that their cables are protected as well, because that's part of the NATO infrastructure?
Well, I'm grateful for his question. He's right that data subsea fibre optic cables carry out 99% of our data. Many people believe it's satellites, but it's actually cables. As a country, we're investing in new technologies, and I would expect that as we get further down towards the time that the Strategic Defence Review is published, he will be able to see the ambition that we have as a government to invest more in autonomous systems, not only to support undersea cable protection, but also to deal with the threats of Russian submarines and other capability and other threats to our nations, making sure that we're investing in our defence capabilities and supporting those people who serve as well.
Are you standing? Tammy, you're standing. I wasn't sure whether you'd change your mind. Chair of the Select Committee, Tammy Singh.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, with escalating threats to our critical infrastructure, I was concerned by reports over the weekend that our armed forces chiefs are apparently being gagged over the upcoming Strategic Defence Review, which of course, has been described by some as limp. I am fully aware that recognising the dangers that the government has invested or announced the largest increase in defence spending since the end of the Second World War. But at this critical time, we certainly should not be sidelining our service chiefs or penny pinching on our nation's defence. So would the Minister like to take this opportunity to reassure the nation that our Strategic Defence Review, when published, will be bold, ambitious and anything but limp?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. We live in incredibly difficult times, and that is why this government is meeting the moment with increased defence spending, the biggest reform of our defence in 50 years, investing in new technologies, investing in our people that keep our country safe, and from the most senior generals and admirals down to privates and sailors, giving all our armed forces that renewed determination to make sure that they understand how we defend our country in best interest, but that the nation backs them in defending our country as well. There'll be more announcements further to come, Mr. Speaker, but let us all be in no doubt that this whole House backs our armed forces and that we look forward to the further investment that we're seeing coming in our defence in due course.
Look there.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the UK's leadership on this issue? The proposed Aquind interconnector raises serious concerns about the security of UK undersea infrastructure, particularly given the significant political donations made by its owners to various Conservative politicians. So will the Secretary of State, further to the previous question, confirm that the SDR will include protecting domestic security as a central focus?
Well, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman for his question. I met recently with a cross-party delegation, including Labour MPs for Portsmouth and the Conservative MP for Fareham as well, to talk about the Aquins interconnector. It is part of a planning decision being taken by the Department for Energy, so it's difficult for me to comment on. But let me be absolutely clear that we take defending our underwater infrastructure very seriously, and will continue to make decisions that support that defence in due course.
Sarah Dyke.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 24 years, I've had the absolute privilege of working with amazing servicewomen across the armed forces, but also within the police, the NHS, and of course our intelligence service. There is no place for unacceptable behaviours in defence, absolutely no place at all, and women who choose to serve deserve better. This government is taking action. Just last week, I announced the launch of a long-called-for tri-service complaints unit that will sit outside of the chain of command, and therefore the single services won't be able to or be perceived to be marking their own homework. I'm working cross-government, in particular with the members of Pontypridd and Birmingham Yardley, on the set-up of a Defence Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force. And just 2 weeks ago, I met with the Women's Network, but also sat on the Raising Our Standards panel, which is from across trade and other organisations, to really criticise us and pull forward any lessons learned from broader society.
Sarah Dyke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response and the work that he's done. But the 2024 Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey reported that 13% of female personnel experienced sexual harassment in service during the prior 12 months, and many women have said they wouldn't report an incident due to the fear of the consequences. The new Tri-Services scheme announced recently is welcome, but what steps is the Minister taking to make it genuinely independent, to ensure women's confidence in the scheme and that their safety while serving in the armed forces?
I think there's two principal elements. The tri-service complaint system will sit outside of the chain of command, and when certain issues hit a threshold, will be taken away from the single services, so they'll be completely independent. The second is the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force that we've created. That will work directly to me. It'll be a small team sat at my level, but it will have tentacles right down into the single services that will provide a safe space for women to go to if they want to raise an issue, a complaint, which can then be transferred either into the complaint system or indeed parallel all the way up to me, so I can take action directly.
Some folks.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. I welcome the measures announced last week. My constituents of Monmouthshire and those people across wider Wales would be really interested to hear more from the Minister about the new Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force and the regional and national champions, and how that will ensure everyone who serves in the armed forces can do so in safety.
I'd refer to the answer to my last question, but that Violence on Women and Girl Task Force is really taking best practice from the rest of government and ensuring it's replicated in defence, but actually going one step further and putting a structure in place. And I always say, when I joined the Marines and I was really young and you're caught in this hierarchical situation, where do you go to make a complaint? You don't actually have anywhere to go to make a complaint. What this will provide is a safe space that if people want to pop right at the chain of command, highlight a concern, that it can be elevated quickly and dealt with rapidly.
Helen Maguire, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the creation of the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force. It's an important step towards enabling complaints being heard and addressed outside of the chain of command. And I thank my right honourable friend for raising this important issue. Like the task force, the government is committed to a new veteran strategy, specifically focusing on the experience of women who have left the service. Will the Minister outline the timescale for the development and implementation of this strategy, given how vital it is that women do come and serve in the armed forces and they feel safe and secure in doing so?
So as part of our future veteran strategy, there will be a women's veterans annex to that, which will provide specific guidance on females want to leave the armed forces. And it's also important to mention it's not just the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force we're setting up. We've got the sexual harassment survey going out, we've got the tri-service complaints system, we've got the review of our zero tolerance policy by KC to move to 100% action, we've got an international culture and behaviours conference to learn best lessons off our international partners, and we've got modernising our military appraisal system to ensure people do get involved in unacceptable behaviour at tracks through the system so they can be held to account.
Dr Neil Shastrahurst.
Question number 8, Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Defence Secretary raised this issue at the meeting of all NATO defence ministers in February and has held a number of discussions with NATO allies since, including with the US Secretary of Defence and in meetings with JEF and E5 allies. European allies are stepping up within NATO, and the UK is leading efforts to increase defence spending and expand defence industrial capacity.
Dr. Neil Shaftesbury House.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I concur with my honourable friend's comments about the deep disappointment that France has blocked European Union countries from allowing safe funds to be used for procurement of British weapons. With that in mind, what has the Minister done to ensure that actions are being taken to guarantee a multilateral NATO-wide procurement strategy with the UK at the centre of it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have met with a number of my equivalents bilaterally, but I think it's important to say that we welcome REARM, that initiative, and it's in all of our interests for the Security Action for Europe to allow Member States to partner with the UK. We're going to continue to emphasise the need for EU defence financing and wider defence industrial initiatives to include third countries like the UK. And as my right honourable friend said in answer to an earlier question, we want to conclude a UK-EU defence and security pact which will give us access to that scheme.
Darwin Bells.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for her response. Last week, the Defence Select Committee met with the Chief of General Staff, who highlighted the challenges of supporting our troops in Estonia. And I highlighted the Rail Baltica project, which has received significant funding from the EU's Connecting Europe facility and NATO, and links my constituency in Leighton via High Speed 1 right through to the Baltics using British steel. Would the Minister meet with me to discuss supporting the expansion of HS1 capacity as the type of opportunity that would support growth within our defence industrial strategy, increases our deterrence and commitment to European allies, whilst bringing high-quality jobs to East London?
So I thank my honourable friend for his question, and as I hope members around the House are starting to realise, if I get asked for a meeting, my general answer to it is yes, so I'm very happy to meet with him.
Thank you, Speaker number 9.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we inherited a broken recruitment system from the Conservatives. We promised to take steps to fix it, and we are. The largest pay increase in 20 years for those who serve, 35% pay increase for recruits, scrapped over 100 outdated medical practices, created a new direct entry cyber pathway, a conditional offer within 10 days of applying, and a training start date within 30 days, and we've announced a new tri-service recruitment scheme to attract the very best to our armed forces.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his response? My constituency of Dartford has a proud military history. With the need to expand our armed forces, which we see at the moment, how can we help a new generation of young people in Dartford to access highly skilled and rewarding careers across all the armed forces?
Can I thank him for his question? Not only is a career in our armed forces good for a young person, it also offers training opportunities. Each of our single services appearing in the top 5 of apprentices employers, the very best in our country. But a career in defence industry is also good for our young people, and the ability to move between regular and reserve and industry more frequently, more easily, not only secures the national defence of our country, provides more opportunities for our young people, but also means that defence can be an even better and bigger engine for growth. And that's the proposals that we'll be coming forward with in due course.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In recent years, for every 100 servicemen that are recruited, 130 have left. That is a completely unsustainable situation. So what is the Minister doing to ensure that we retain more troops? That means not only the package within our armed forces, but competitive packages in the private sector.
Well, the honourable gentleman is entirely right about the terrible state of armed forces retention that we inherited. We've seen armed forces morale drop from 60% in 2010 to only 40% in July last year. So we do need to invest more in our armed forces. That's why we've given the biggest pay rise in 20 years. That's why we're bringing defence housing back into public control so it can be invested in. But it's also why we're creating the Armed Forces Commissioner to provide an independent champion for service welfare matters for those who serve. But we do need to invest more, and that's why together with my ministerial colleagues, we've created an Armed Forces Retention and Recruitment Board within the MOD to focus efforts on improving service life for all those who serve and their families.
Just Question
number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you for the question. We are moving forward with, as mentioned before, our Women and Girls Task Force to drive progress towards a government commitment to half violence against women and girls in a decade. Last year, we launched the Defence's Domestic Abuse Action Plan, and we trained over 700 service police and specialist domestic abuse and coercive control training, and now everybody in the military goes through unacceptable sexual behaviour training, every man and woman across the armed forces.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to King's College London, 1 in 10 of our armed forces personnel are survivors of domestic abuse. But because there is no specific offence of domestic abuse in the law, the Ministry of Justice has confirmed they can't comprehensively identify perpetrators, therefore cannot comprehensively rehabilitate them, and therefore cannot comprehensively keep victims and survivors safe. So will the Minister join me and colleagues across this House in campaigning for a specific offence of domestic abuse in the law so that we can better protect our armed forces personnel from domestic abuse?
So it's completely clear to me that any sort of domestic abuse in any way, shape or form in the armed forces is completely unacceptable. And if we can help address and track some of that through the armed forces, it makes us far easier to deal with and rehabilitate. So I'll take the conversation on after these questions.
Lord Pilkington.
Question number 11, Mr.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. UK defence networks face a range of state threats and malign actors. In 2024, the National Cyber Security Centre received 1,957 reports of cyber attacks. 89 were nationally significant, 12 severe in nature. The government continues to improve resilience and response options to these threats.
Lord Pilkington.
I thank the Minister for his answer. As part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, together with colleagues, I recently visited the 77th Brigade and learnt more about the amazing work that the men and women of that brigade are doing to tackle Russian disinformation in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. That trip came just a few days after the United States President announced his decision to cease altogether American Russian disinformation, offensive cyber operations against Russia. That's led to growing concerns that willing countries don't have the capacity or the ability to tackle that particular threat. Can the Minister tell us what assessment has been done about the capabilities that we have within the United Kingdom to tackle that threat? And would he agree with me that that places greater pressure on the 77th Brigade and other agencies? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. The 77th Brigade do a superb job in tackling disinformation, especially those by malign actors. We need to expand our provision and our range of capabilities. That is precisely why we've created a new direct entry cyber pathway, recruiting people directly into our cyber forces to support our national resilience, both defensive and offensive operations. He'll understand that I can't talk about ongoing operations, but let me tell him we're investing more in this area to keep ourselves and our allies safe.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. With GCHQ, the UK's cyber operations are genuinely world-leading. So what assurances can the Minister give the House that we will continue to provide Ukraine support with their cyber security?
Mr. Speaker, we have made very clear that we will continue supporting Ukraine, not only to put them in the very best possible position on the battlefield in any negotiations to come, but to secure their critical national infrastructure, working with their defence and civilian sectors, which are incredibly impressive in this area, to make sure they have the technology, the training and the access to support to keep themselves and their country safe. We'll continue that work.
Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 12.
Mr. Speaker, when the British public elected us as the new government, we said Labour will seek an ambitious new UK-EU security pact to strengthen cooperation on the threats that we face. We will rebuild relationships with key European allies, and so with NATO as the cornerstone of our security in Europe, that is exactly what we are doing.
Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his response. Given President Trump's increasing unpredictability and shifting policies, Would the Minister share how the Government is strengthening defence procurement agreements with European partners to enhance our capabilities and reduce our reliance on the United States?
Well, Mr. Speaker, when I spoke last week with High Representative Callas and I spoke with Commissioner Kubilius, that was exactly what I discussed. Closer defence collaboration that will see a stronger European effort, UK and the EU, but within the NATO framework, which is the cornerstone for all of us to keep ourselves safe.
Josh Newbrain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Cannock Chase have steadfastly supported the people of Ukraine since Russia's illegal invasion. But can the Secretary of State confirm that collective support for Ukraine will be a major focus of his discussions with EU counterparts, and that under this government the UK will always lead the way in stepping up support for Ukraine?
Indeed, I can, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend makes an important point. This is a period which is critical for Ukraine, is critical for European security, and I hope that he sees a UK government stepping up to provide stronger support for Ukraine, coordinating allies to do more, stepping up also on European security, and above all, stepping up on defence spending.
Democrat spokesperson Helen Maguire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we support the government's commitment to strengthening defence ties with our European partners, but it needs to go further and faster to ensure that the UK doesn't get left behind. Has the Defence Secretary spoken with his counterparts in the UA about the value of the new standalone UK-EU Defence Pact, which would enable the UK to better influence decisions around new finance programmes like a rearmament bank supporting defence investment across Europe?
Yes, last week I met with High Representative Callas. I spoke with Commissioner Kubilius, and that was exactly the subject of our conversations.
Jamie Stone.
Number 13, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK is fully committed to the Joint Expeditionary Force. I discussed the JEF in my visits in Denmark, Latvia, Finland, Lithuania and Netherlands last month, and I meet regularly with the JEF partners' defence attachés, including last week.
Jamie Stone.
I thank the Minister for his answer, and clearly we do have a particularly good relationship with those countries that make up the Joint Expeditionary Force. Mr. Speaker, the Minister and I have both completed the Parliamentary Armed Forces scheme and have both plunged into the snowdrifts in Norway at Bardufoss. Some of the kit the Norwegians had was particularly impressive, I'm sure the Minister would agree. So could I press the Minister, what work can we do with these countries in the Joint Expeditionary Force on the front of procurement and design and perhaps development of equipment?
Just to clarify to the House, there were different snowdrifts at different times, otherwise there could be stories around there. But let me say to the honourable gentleman that the more procurement we can do with our allies, not only the better in terms of interoperable that equipment will be, the better it will be in interchangeability, and with the opportunities in the High North with P8s, F-35s and potentially Type 26 frigates being shared by common nations in the High North, there's a huge opportunity to work together more closely, creating more jobs and a more effective deterrence against Russian aggression.
Number 14, Mr. Speaker.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question. I've visited multiple cadet units now all over the country, and I've been truly astounded at the social mobility cadets provides for a whole range of youth, over 140,000 cadets that we have at the moment, supported by 26,000 volunteers. And we're doing everything we can over time to look to expand those programmes and ensure the opportunity is available for everybody from every walk of life.
Well done,
thank you, Mr. And I thank the Minister for his answer. In my role as the new chair of the British Shooting Sports Council, I take a very keen interest in cadet target rifle shooting. And the Minister will be aware that the Ministry of Defence is proposing to withdraw from service the 7.62 target rifle, cadet rifle, from 2026 and the 2.2 rifle just 2 years later. Aside from depriving cadets from the opportunity to learn the highly disciplined and valuable skill of firearm safety and use, it calls into question the future of target rifle shooting within the UK. Would the Minister be prepared to meet with me and representatives of the shooting community and target rifle community to come along and discuss opportunities to try to reverse this?
I'd like to thank you again for the point, and I would quite happily come and talk through that in due course. Being in the military for 24 years, I spent a lot of time shooting, and I can see the benefits of it, so absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Number 15, please.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, SMEs can help us make defence an engine for growth in all of our nations and regions. I want to see far more involvement from SMEs in our procurement, providing agility, innovation and resilience as we seek to ramp up our industrial production. That's why the Prime Minister recently launched a new Defence SME Support Hub and committed us to publish a new target for MOD spend with SMEs.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for her response. Last week, as part of the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, had the privilege of visiting His Majesty's Royal Naval Base in Portsmouth to meet personnel and see equipment made and currently in use in our armed forces, made by Accuracy International and Sig Sauer, an SME firearms manufacturer in my constituency of Portsmouth North. Mr. Speaker, Accuracy International provides employment for over 100 local people. Can I ask the Minister what she is doing to ensure companies like Accuracy International and Sig Sauer are given a fair shot in procurement of defence and continue to provide jobs in my city?
A fair shot. So, I'd like to commend her on her puns, but I know that Accuracy International have made a great contribution to UK defence and export. I've been talking to defence firms, many of these SMEs, during the Defence Industrial Strategy consultation, and I hope that the changes we're going to make to speed up procurement and provide more access to opportunities will transform the chances they have of doing business with us, whilst making defence an engine for growth across all of our nations and regions.
And John.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are shortly to appoint a National Armaments Director at a salary of over £600,000 a year. What? And I hope that colossal salary comes with it the mandate to be able to tear up the book when it comes to defence procurement as we rearm the nation. So can the front bench reassure us that when we get the National Armaments Director back to the Defence Select Committee in a year's time, they aren't saying, well, we tried to change things, but they wouldn't let me?
Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable gentleman that we're tearing up the way in which procurement works before the National Armament Director actually moves into his place. One of the biggest jobs in government, and a job that needs the right salary to attract the right person. I'm absolutely clear that we will be doing things differently, and the National Armaments Director will be held accountable for making sure that we do.
We now come to topicals. Gurinder Singh Jassan.
Topical question on, Mr. Speaker.
First,
Mr. Speaker, a lot has happened since the last defence oral 6 weeks ago. The Prime Minister has announced the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War, hitting 2.5% of GDP by 2027, 3% in the next Parliament. I've chaired the Ukraine Defence Contact Group of nearly 50 countries, the first European Defence Minister to do so, which secured an extra €1.5 billion worth of military support for Ukraine. And with France, the UK is leading plans to put together a coalition of the willing to secure any peace deal in Ukraine, with 31 nations joining a planning meeting last week at Permanent Joint Headquarters, with further meetings there this week as we accelerate that planning. Mr. Speaker, this is a government stepping up on European security, stepping up on Ukraine, stepping up on defence spending, and in all areas. This is the UK leadership in action.
Gurinder Singh Jassan.
Mr. Speaker, the government commitment to use defence procurement to strengthen our industrial sector is very welcome. Can the Minister please outline how the government is supporting local manufacturers across the UK and ensuring that defence contracts contribute to long-term industrial growth and job creation, in particular encouraging and supporting companies like Parget Housewares in my constituency, a private ethnic minority-owned business and one of the UK's largest producers of pot and pans and bakeware, using advanced and extremely energy-efficient techniques.
Mr. Speaker, I can indeed. My honourable friend is right. SMEs are often the driver of productivity, the driver of innovation, and we recently announced that we will be setting targets for an increasing share of defence contracts to go to SMEs, alongside the formation of a new Defence Innovation Office.
James Cartledge, Shadow Secretary of State.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If our forces go to Ukraine, it will be as part of a peacekeeping mission. But as the Veterans Minister reminded us earlier, on Operation Banner, that was also described as being there to keep the peace. Yet decades later, those who served are being hounded in our courts
And in Iraq, our soldiers were subjected to hundreds of vexatious claims. So if our forces go to Ukraine, will the Secretary of State consider derogating from the ECHR so as to maximise our protection against possible lawfare?
Mr. Speaker, if we go into Ukraine, we will be going into a negotiated peace, not a shooting war. Our aim is to secure borders, is to ensure safe skies, is to ensure safe seas. I just ask the honourable gentleman, is he saying that he will not support a UK mission and UK troops without that derogation?
Of course not. The Secretary of State knows perfectly well the Labour government derogated from the ECHR after 9/11. And there is a country in Europe which has derogated from the ECHR since 2015. That is Ukraine. It's because there's a war on. And surely he would recognise, even if it's a peacekeeping force, there will still be threats. And Russian nationals have been particularly adept at lawfare in our own courts. So I ask him, surely he will at least consider giving the maximum protection to our armed forces from vexatious claims by derogating from the ECHR if there is a deployment.
Our armed forces will always have our fullest support. And just to be clear to the honourable gentleman, we are responding now, alongside France, to put together a coalition of the willing, responding to the challenge from the US for Europe to step up on Ukraine. We are responding to the requirement from Ukraine for security arrangements that will give them the conviction and confidence that any negotiated peace will last. That is a worthy mission. It's one that the UK is leading, and I would hope that it has the support of all sides of this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our troops must be able to trust the body armour that they wear to keep them safe. So can the Minister for the Armed Forces update the House on how withdrawing cracked, enhanced combat body armour is going, and when everyone in our forces can expect to know that their body armour is safe?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. I fully agree with him. On something as fundamental as body armour, Mr. Speaker, we back our troops. I ordered an immediate action to replace ECBA on the front line, flying new body armour to units worldwide. Rapid testing of plates is underway, and our people should know that their safety matters to this government, and we will act to keep them safe.
John Lamont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week it was announced that the SNP government are sending more shipbuilding contracts abroad. 7 Kalmat ferries that could be constructed on the Clyde will instead be built in Poland. So can the Minister share how many warships the United Kingdom government are currently building in Scotland?
Excellent question.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman will probably know, there are the Type 31s being built at Rosyth and the Type 26 is being built at Govan. So we've got a programme for 8 at Govan. We've got so far 5 at Rosyth. So that's the current number.
8 plus 5.
Oliver Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know all too well, Lancashire has a proud defence manufacturing pedigree at the cutting edge of our British sovereign capability. You think manufacturing, you think Lancashire. Will the Minister for Procurement continue to champion Lancashire's defence jobs, and will she commit, I understand this is cheeky, to replacing the Tranche 1 Typhoon aircraft with new, modern, Lancashire-made Typhoons?
Mr. Speaker, can I commend my honourable friend for the way in which he's asked this question? He will know that the Strategic Defence Review is considering our current mix of 4th and 5th generation aircraft, but he'll also know that in addition to the Typhoon in Lancashire, they also make 15% of the F-35, 37% of the Typhoon, and so there is work aplenty no matter which aeroplane is bought in Lancashire.
Franklin.
My constituent Sam served in Afghanistan and suffers from PTSD. Although he's entitled to compensation, his condition has left him struggling with the forms, and 10 years on he's been told he can only have £600 when he's entitled to £2,000. Can the Minister explain what steps are being taken to ensure those who give so much serving our country are helped to access the financial assistance they are entitled to and not blocked by bureaucracy?
I think that's a really valid question. We pay out over £1.5 billion a year in compensation, the Armed Forces Compensation Scheme and the War Pension Scheme. So if you'd like to write to me on that specific case, I can have a look into it, but I'd also refer you to Op Courage, which is obviously linked to mental health and has 34,000 referrals to date.
Chancellor.
Does the Minister agree with me that as we expand military expenditure, it creates a golden opportunity to deal with the shortage of people going into science, technology and engineering jobs? And as we expand the military budget, we should make sure the defence industry is expanding the number of apprenticeships and building a robust skills and training base so that young people can benefit from those jobs.
Well, I agree very much with my honourable friend, and of course there are skill shortages across much of manufacturing, not only defence, and so there is certainly going to be an issue. But I can tell my honourable friend that the apprentices that I've met in the defence industry tend to smile the whole time. They are getting extremely good training for lifelong excellent jobs. So I'm absolutely certain that we can get that across to young people and ensure that defence gets its fair share of the skilled people that we need.
Mr Speaker, with the UK frozen out of the EU rearmament scheme, whilst defence contracts and security firms in Albania, Norway and South Korea stand to benefit, what estimates has the Secretary of State made about the potential loss of economic activity in the UK as a result of that?
Look, the strongest argument for saying that there needs to be UK collaboration and cooperation with the EU and across Europe is that some of our best capabilities, from typhoons to meteors to storm shadow, have been developed with multinational efforts, including the UK. It's that sort of collaboration we want to secure for the future. The EU White Paper gives us a basis for starting to negotiate that.
Thanks.
We are incredibly proud of our veterans in Peterborough. Will the Minister join with me in recognising the work of Councillor Jason McNally, our Armed Forces champion, and his predecessor, Councillor John Fox, and tell us what more the government can do to help them support more people signing up to the Armed Forces Covenant?
I'd like to thank the honourable member for highlighting two amazing individuals who are, I can imagine, providing a huge amount of hours to supporting the veterans community and indeed the armed forces community. The Covenant will come into law in 2026, and when it does, we need to make sure that those armed forces champions understand what that provides at the local level and can harness its benefits for the whole of the armed forces.
John Cooper.
Mr Speaker, thank you. The Hawk aircraft, most famous in the scarlet livery of the Red Arrows, is at the end of its service life. Can the front bench explain to us what steps they are taking to make sure we are going to replace that with a British-built sovereign capability?
The honourable gentleman is right that Hawk is due to be out of service in the early 2030s. We are taking steps to consider alternatives and what they might be, but as yet there are of course we will of course consider any UK options that exist, and so but I can't tell him what the answer to that is yet, but it is under active consideration.
Hazelgrove.
Speaker, and those who bravely serve in our forces should never lose their say in our country's future. So may I welcome the government's swift action to introduce the fact that veterans' ID cards can now be used as voter ID. And may I ask the Minister what plans there are to ensure that veterans around the country are aware of this important change?
So the Veterans ID card has been a fantastic initiative and has now been rolled out across most veterans. We have a lot of applications, thousands of applications a week, and we'll continue to endeavour to make sure they get delivered in the most timely and effective manner. Anybody who's interested in any government, any veterans' welfare issues or services that can be available, please go on the gov.uk website, type in veteran support, and there'll be a plethora of different avenues to unlock that for you.
George Freeman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mid-Norfolk is a proud rural and military constituency with many employees working at RF Morham and Swanton Morley Barracks, home to the Queen's Dragoon Guards, and many cadets and veterans. May I ask, a few years ago we managed to secure the extension of Swanton Morley Barracks, which had been scheduled for closure. Does the welcome defence surge mean that that closure, slated for 2031, might now be reviewed?
The honourable gentleman, I can't give him an answer to that right now, but I'm certainly happy to look into it and either meet with him if he wants a meeting or write to him.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Like many colleagues, I have a number of nuclear veterans in my Nahill and Muir constituency. Can I ask ministers what steps they are taking to meet with veterans, to acknowledge their service and to deal with the consequences of their service and their exposure to nuclear materials.
So I've met with nuclear test veterans from two of the main charities, and will continue to do so on a regular basis to ensure there's a continuity of engagement. There's two things we've promised to do. One is a full and thorough review into the records, not a stovepipe loop, but a whole review. That will take a bit of time, but we're going to do that in a thorough manner. And the second one is consistent engagement to ensure people are informed of our progress.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, President Macron has blocked British firms from the new EU Defence Fund. What are the Minister's views on this act of solidarity?
It's just not accurate. There's a new proposal for a strategy from the European Union. It has opportunities for third countries like the UK to participate. The discussions that we're having demonstrate the importance of the UK being able to collaborate industrially and as governments in order to meet the threats that we face.
Jim Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that when we discuss procurement and British-made weapons, that we also need to consider our responsibilities and our legal duties in terms of issuing of arms licences, and can the Minister agree with me that now is the time to talk about ending all arms sales to Israel?
Mr. Speaker, we keep all of our arms exports constantly under review. The situation is that we've made the decisions on a limited number of exports in relation to Israel. That position of keeping things under review continues, but we've got no plans at this stage to make any change.
Mr. Speaker, Staff Sergeant Peter Clough died in February 2016 with an in-service designation to that death. His widow, Kirsty, and his children, Meredith and Heather, were in the benefit of the Armed Forces Pension Scheme and remain so. However, the Armed Forces Pension Scheme made a miscalculation and have now sent debt collectors to them to try and recover a fairly small sum. I've asked about this 3 months ago and have not had a response from the department. Would the Secretary of State or one of his ministers meet with me to discuss this unedifying advert for the Ministry of Defence?
That's a truly harrowing story. I will absolutely take that on, and we'll meet straight after this and get it solved.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent report, A Dark Shadow, shone a light on the link between sexual assault and suicidal ideation in the military community. I was therefore really pleased to see the announcement from the MOD last week around the removal of sexual harassment investigations from the chain of command, something which campaigners and survivors have been campaigning for such a long time. But they're also keen for reassurance. So could the Minister confirm that this is not a continuation of the failed efforts of the previous government, but a step change in making it truly independent?
This is absolutely a step change. That tri-service complaint system that has been removed out of the single services has been called for a long time. We've taken decisive action to do it, and it will move in the right direction. Combine that with the Violence Against Women and Girls Task Force, and we're actually double tapping to ensure that we've got the best support for women and indeed anyone else in the armed forces.
Bobby Dean.
Mr. Speaker, concerns have been growing over China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. Given the strategic importance of the Taiwan Strait to global security, what has the department's response been to these rising tensions?
Well, I'm grateful for his question. We're certainly of the view that any difficulties in the Taiwan Strait should be resolved diplomatically without the use of force or coercion. The United Kingdom will be deploying our carrier task strike group to the Indo-Pacific later this year as a projection of our responsibility to the region, but also making clear that, difficulties are best resolved diplomatically.
Nathan Debs.
Speaker, on Friday I was pleased to join colleagues from across the House to hear the Royal Marines Band service in concert as part of the Mountbatten Festival of Music. Can I invite the Government to reaffirm its commitment to the Royal Marines Band service because they provide a huge contribution to defence diplomacy as well as combat operations?
Thank you. Great question. I'd like to say that the Royal Marine Band Service are the best band service in our armed forces, and they're absolutely safe under our watch. They provide both a fantastic influence opportunity, but also they provide essential military services outside of their musical profession.
David Davis.
When the Defence Secretary answered the Shadow Secretary of State, he should know that this whole House supports the actions of the government to preserve peace in the Ukraine. But that was not the point he was making. He was asking whether the Ministry of Defence recognises it has a duty of care to soldiers who fight for their country and then face decades of lawfare, misusing the European Convention on Human Rights. Will the department do something to protect those soldiers?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, we are totally committed to the duty of care we have, totally committed to standing by our forces, and we recognise that there was also legislation that the last government put in place to deal with any concerns in this place, the Overseas Operations Act.
Becky Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Drug-resistant infections have been rising in Ukraine and are a major challenge in treating wounded soldiers and getting them back to the front line. And we've also seen how these infections have spread outside Ukraine and into Europe. In the context of conflict, what steps is the Minister and their department taking to ensure antimicrobial resistance is appropriately considered in the National Security Strategy?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. It is really important that we meet the threats we're facing that aren't just state actors, but a whole range of issues. I'll be very happy meeting with her to discuss her interest in this topic further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon I was contacted by the father of Theodore, who lives in Greyshot in my constituency. Theodore wants to go to the Army Foundation College in Harrogate in September, but Capita has not sent the request to his local surgery to get his medical record. Will the Minister in general look at how Capita is performing, but more especially make sure that Theodore can attend the Foundation College in September?
Well, can I commend Theodore for his interest in attending Harrogate? Very happy if he were to write to me, and I'll happily look into it. As he will know, Capita are not continuing with the armed forces, with the army recruitment work. They've been replaced with a new tri-service offer that will come online in 2027.
That completes questions. Will that front bench change over? Right, we now come to the statement from the Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I wish to make a statement regarding the power outage caused by a substation fire that impacted Heathrow Airport operations on Friday, the 21st of March. I would like to begin by acknowledging the disruption to everyone affected by this incident. Many homes, schools and businesses temporarily lost power. Some families had to evacuate their homes, and many thousands have had their travel plans impacted. I also want to thank the firefighters and emergency responders who worked in very difficult conditions to put the fire out, as well as Heathrow, the National Grid and all other public services